What's going on, everybody? Hope you're having a good week so far. So today I just wanted to address kind of the dark truth of owning a Steam Deck. It's not all sunshine and rainbows for this system, and if you want it to be a convenient handheld device, sometimes you're kind of out of luck. The main point of owning the system is to successfully play huge AAA titles on the go. And for the most part, the system does this exceptionally well, and I still think the Steam Deck is an impressive piece of hardware. But there are times where I wish the system would be easier to work with. There are times I gave up on the system because I was trying to play a specific title and it just wouldn't work. So I would give up on that particular game for months, and sometimes these games are playable. Most of the time they're not verified. And weirdly enough, most unsupported games just work. But when it comes to the playable titles, I feel like I already have PTSD just looking at that yellow marker. Games like Prototype just kept crashing on me, as well as Jedi Fallen Order and Dead or Alive 6. The harsh reality is trying different Proton versions to fix these issues, like crashing or cutscenes not working. And yes, these issues can be extremely frustrating, with Proton being a necessity to play these games, and without Proton you can't do anything. But of course, with every bad there is good, and Proton has solved more issues than caused. But when it comes to something I absolutely dread with the Steam Deck, even though its software is revolutionary and easy to work with, a lot of the times the shader cache option is on by default. So you're going to download a lot of shader cache. There are games like Darksiders War Mastered that require a 20 gigabyte shader cache download. That game itself is 22 gigabytes, and you need another game on top of that just to play it properly. Needless to say, the shader cache can be extremely frustrating. And for those instances, I usually check off the shader cache option when downloading these types of games. Most games require about 100 megabytes of shader cache, so it's no big deal for those types of games. But sometimes you download a big file in just shader cache, like for the recent The Last of Us Part 1. That file was 12 gigabytes, and the game still didn't work. So a lot of the time you're wasting all this space for nothing. So going in and out of desktop mode, deleting each shader cache, looking up the SteamDB database to check exactly which config file and shader cache is taking up all this space is a hassle, to say the least. There are apps that can simplify this process, but if you want to be specific, going into the file itself can be less worrisome. So yeah, I think the shader cache, out of any problem I'm going to list here, has been a #1 issue from day one. But besides that, there are simple games like Sonic Adventure 2 that I just go into, and yet another problem occurs where for some reason the controller needs to be binded to a keyboard in order to play it. So you play games that require precision like Sonic Adventure 2 with keyboard controls, and those types of games can't work without it. That game is also playable, but without fail, every single time I have to remap the controls and download some kind of customized community control layout. So recently I just quit, uninstalled this 3 gigabyte GameCube game, and just got Sonic Adventure 2 on the emulator, and I never ran into this problem again. Usually most of the time, playing some of these old games like Max Payne, Sonic Adventure, Splinter Cell, you run into controller issues because at the time there wasn't any gamepad mapped to it, but for some reason there's a gamepad mapped to Sonic Adventure 1 but not 2. So these issues can be sparse, but it is very frustrating when you're playing a classic game and you can't control it correctly, or the right joystick is mapped to the mouse and the sensitivity is extremely high. So you're going seizure warning type speeds by default, and so you have to mess with that for about 20 to 30 minutes, and you've already wasted enough time with it, and by the time you get to the game you kind of just don't want to play it anymore because the process of being able to control it properly-ish was so disheartening. So for games like Splinter Cell, Max Payne, and Sonic, I just emulated them. Usually the GameCube versions are the best to emulate because they are the smallest. Nintendo has always done a great job of compressing big games into small files, like with the original Resident Evil 2. That game was only 64 megabytes. I don't even know how they did it till this day. And with the Splinter Cell titles and every other GameCube game, they have to be at the most 1.2 gigabytes because that's all the disc can hold. So that was my solution to the extremely elongated control issues with slightly more classic titles. And it does suck to not be able to play titles that I actually bought on the system. But for the most part, since PlayStation 3 games can't emulate that well, I guess playing games like Splinter Cell Double Agent with mouse controls isn't the worst thing. Playing it at 60 with mouse controls mapped to a gamepad kind of beats playing it at at 10 frames per second. And yeah, the last thing that kind of depresses me about playing handheld titles on the go with a Proton layer is that every time you activate the Proton layer, and if you're in offline mode, it's kind of like you sort of reinstalled the OS. So the game sees that Proton layer being reestablished offline, and if the game needs an internet connection the first time it launches, it's most likely going to have a dreaded message saying, for your first time launching this game, you need to be online or in online mode. And I ran into that issue too many times while on the road or at somebody else's house or a place that didn't have internet. So there has to be that awkward exchange of going into my phone and turning on my hotspot or asking for a Wi-Fi password, or sometimes the hotspot doesn't even work because the signal is so bad, which is the reason why I'm playing a game in the first place. But yeah, for a lot of these portable titles, you're going to see that message stating that you need to be in online mode first to play it, which defeats the purpose. And honestly, I haven't really run into that issue too many times with Windows games. So unfortunately, Proton and its many layers usually requires an online mode before starting a game that requires internet before its first launch. And that is the unfortunate reality of owning a Steam Deck. I'm not sure if Valve can even fix this kind of problem, because usually switching Proton versions can cause the game to sort of reset. And sometimes switching Proton versions can cause the game to forget all of your save data entirely. And this leads to the last concern: third-party titles and Steam's inconsistency to maintain these third-party titles in your library. Recently, I lost 4,000 third-party titles that I manually set without ROM Manager. And a lot of these third-party titles that I owned either completely got wiped out or all of the save data for those third-party titles were missing. So I had to go into the file, into the last folder that I created as a placeholder for that third-party title. And fortunately, my save data was still in the Compat data folder, but all I had to do was look for this random folder with random numbers that weren't officially configured to that title, but instead randomly generated to emulate that folder so I can save the game. So the process was still kind of simple. All I had to do was find the folder that had the save data specifically and then search for that folder so I could find duplicates. So that's how I got my save data for 20 plus hours. And this has been a process, and all of these issues have been ongoing for the entire year that I've owned the Steam Deck. But for the most part, there is really nothing to compare the Steam Deck to in terms of pricing and hardware until recently. The ROG Ally is coming out, and there are rumors that it's going to be $600 to $700. And if it can mitigate or just get rid of these issues entirely, that would just be a natural sigh of relief. And a lot of gamers are going to see the frustrations of owning a Steam Deck and automatically probably return it or sell it for an ROG Ally if the price is right. So yes, there is a dark truth to owning the Steam Deck that a lot of Steam Deck owners hide until there are better options. And right now there are better options, potentially. And maybe it's coming soon. Originally, I thought the release date for the ROG Ally was May 11th, but that's just the interview/information event that's going to happen. And that's going to be a big event. It's going to single-handedly determine if the Steam Deck is still going to be relevant. But all in all, I do love the software of Linux and Proton, and Valve is trying extremely hard to perfect this software. And right now, it is a lot better than Windows. There are caveats like playing online mode and third-party titles sort of forgetting they exist, and Steam doing backflips and rewinding through time every time I change a Proton version, because that's basically changing the OS or an emulated OS for this game. So there are big leaps and jumps to get these games to work handheld. And for the most part, they do work. I'd say 80% of my library works successfully right now. I have no complaints in terms of most of my titles. And I couldn't say the same for Windows right now, because on my gaming laptop, there are tons of games I could list off the top of my head that are very big titles that do not work with my current Windows update and OS. So there are huge caveats when it comes to a random gaming laptop or PC with a certain Windows update and OS as well. But just these small things bother me consistently on the Steam Deck. Not being able to play Sonic Adventure 2 when I just want to start it up and play City Escape one time because the controls aren't mapped again. Having Proton completely wipe out my settings for every single title upon an update, or messing with ROM Manager. In order to fix the ROM Manager problem, I had to delete all of the controller layouts and the folder that it came in. So the resolution settings were different and the controller settings were different. But yeah, besides the controller settings, Proton, shader cache, and general game compatibility, which is a lot to take in if you want a Steam Deck. But the reason why I recommend a Steam Deck to pretty much anybody is because most of the games do work with default settings. But there are just these few issues that you run into when you're playing games that are either playable or unsupported. For the most part, the verified games seem to work with default settings. But yeah, these are the issues that I've been running into over the course of the year, and when I do run into it, it is extremely frustrating. But when I'm not running into it, the Steam Deck amazes me every single time, without fault. Till this day, I'm still looking at a game like Ghost Recon Wildlands and just going like, wow, this looks amazing. I can't believe I'm playing this on the go. So I still have those moments, as well as the polar opposite of saying, wow, I can't believe this game isn't playing. This thing is trash. Sometimes I do audibly say that, nowhere near to the extent I said it on a Windows gaming laptop, where I would mess with the coding of a certain title, and after about 5 hours, it still wouldn't work. So for the most part, Windows is a lot worse in almost every feasible way. So yeah, if you're going through Steam Deck issues, let me know what kind of issues you're going through. Are you having shader cache issues, controller, Proton compatibility? You're probably having all of the above, because that's just the territory you have to deal with when owning this device. And even though all of those issues are present most of the time, especially if you want to play one of your favorite titles, and nothing is going to stop somebody from saying to themselves, maybe I can play this if I mess with Proton enough, or if I do enough research. And yeah, maybe you can play it if you do enough research. But you are going to run into small issues. But for the most part, when I think a game isn't going to work, I just stop and think, well, Valve is probably going to fix this soon anyway. The confidence is no longer with just inconsistent game developers. It's also with Valve, which is the manufacturer of the actual system. And that's way more than I could say about the countless Windows PCs out in the market. Thinking to yourself, well, they'll probably fix this soon, while you're looking at a gaming laptop that is one of 1,000 different models, is kind of a ridiculous notion, because most likely they won't work on it anytime soon, and most likely they will forget about it. But yeah, besides those issues, there are a few rare ones like SteamOS updates, but I run into those a lot less than I run into these consistent problems. These issues are just the quality of life scenarios that you have to deal with if you want to be able to play awesome titles on the go for a good price like the Steam Deck is offering. You're just going to have to deal with these issues. But the good part and the positive side is that these issues will most likely be fixed one day, because Valve is looking at every single bug report and reported issue, and they are working hard to work with these developers to fix these issues for this particular platform. So yeah, there's nothing really to worry about, but I have gone through a lot of trauma with the system, and seeing a lot of articles out there stating that the ROG Ally is the Steam Deck they always wanted because of these issues that I listed in this video, I can kind of resonate with those journalists and those points. If I do see an ROG Ally, will I get it because of these issues I'm going through? Not right away. I'm most likely going to wait to see if the system actually is supported as well as the Steam Deck, because no matter what issue you go through with the system, there's always some kind of fallout leading to a fix, because there's enough people on the platform that can pinpoint these issues. But yeah, I think with PC gaming, there's always going to be an issue. It's just what you get with the PC gaming platform and territory. No matter what, you will always run into issues with almost every title that you own. Nothing is going to work perfect. When you're getting a gaming laptop that's $3,000 or just a full-on desktop PC that's $4,000, there should never be a thought in your mind saying, well, since I have this expensive PC, I'm probably never going to run into any issues. You're always going to run into issues when you own a PC. It's just the territory. And it's because there are so many different models and versions, customizations of the PC itself. That's the amazing and terrible thing about owning a PC. And the Steam Deck is unfortunately one of the customizations and versions of a PC that is out there, but it is right now much more ubiquitous than a random model of an Alienware computer or an Asus computer. There are so many models of these types of PCs and manufacturers that it's impossible for the developer to keep up. But because it is possible and probable that your game is going to be fixed on the Steam Deck, I think that alone makes it a miracle in the PC space. With ROG Ally, they're already throwing in 2 different types of processors. I think throwing in 2 different types of models with very different specs in terms of power is not a very good thing, because developers are most likely going to create their game for the more powerful model, and the cheaper, less powerful model is probably going to fall by the wayside. The only reason Asus released a less powerful model is because they wanted the price point to be impressive and they wanted to get your attention, but most likely more people are going to buy the more powerful model with the Z1 Extreme, and that's just going to make a less powerful model become forgotten in terms of development and updates. The reason I see it as a potential financial shit show is because it's releasing two counterparts from the beginning. When you release two different models, that does seem efficient and cool, but you're releasing two counterparts and competitors in your very own platform in terms of software. Asus is going to have to work double time in order to mitigate issues, opposed to Steam Deck only having one particular processor and one GPU, one motherboard. In terms of different models, the Steam Deck doesn't need to worry about that. Valve is just going to work as hard as they can to optimize titles for this particular device. But Asus is already making things complicated by releasing two devices. If it just released one, I would be more confident in this product. But I know for a fact people are going to want the 8 teraflops and not the 2, because it's just going to be more future-proof if you get the Z1 Extreme. But no matter what, there are going to be people that can only afford the 2 teraflop model with just the standard Z1, and games are going to have to be optimized for that. So there's going to be complications with the Z1 Extreme as well. And who knows, maybe it might be as simple as you can't do 4K on this model, but you can do 4K on the Z1 Extreme. But this isn't Nintendo or PlayStation or Xbox. It's not going to be that simple. This is PC. It's always complicated. With PC games, you always have to assume the worst. And no matter what, even though I knew what I was getting into with the Steam Deck, I was assuming the worst. I was assuming that some games were just not going to work. And for the most part, because my expectations were realistic, bare minimum with this PC handheld, I was surprisingly impressed by the system when I first got my hands on it. And the same is going to go for the ROG Ally. Because I have such low expectations for Asus and Windows, if it does turn out to be a real Steam Deck competitor in terms of software and hardware, I'm going to be blown away. And I'm probably going to love this system if it works to any capacity close to the Steam Decks. But yeah, that's all I got for today, and I hope you guys have a good one. Later.